I'm very happy to introduce today's moderator, Greg Niemeyer. Greg is a data artist and a professor of media innovation at UC Berkeley, and he's also the former director and co-founder of the Berkeley Center for New Media. His work in this exhibition, Salus per Aquam, is that correct? Yep. Thank you. The Water Castle brings together historical records and live data that updates every 10 minutes. It's here on my left. Greg first began working on water-related issues through his research on hydrocolonialism in Kenya, where he collaborated with biocultural anthropologist and public health scholar Mubolo Owor. Together, they examined how historical and present-day power structures influence access to water, infrastructure, and environmental justice. More broadly, Greg's work focuses on how technology mediates relationships between individuals and collectives, often with a sense of play and experimentation. During one of our early meetings for this exhibition, it was immediately clear to the curator, Amy Kish, who is with us, by the way, today as well. So find her later and talk about any piece here. And some of the artists actually are present as well. So when we talked to Greg about lots of things, especially also, AI and water, it was very clear that Greg needs to moderate this panel, and we are very grateful he agreed to do it. So now I'd like to invite Greg Niemeyer and our panelists to start the conversation. We will have a discussion for about 40 minutes, followed by enough time for questions from the audience, from you, and afterwards there will be more appetizers, drinks, and time to continue the conversation with our panelists. So thanks for being here and enjoy the conversation. Greg, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening. Nevertheless, the Schweizerische Generalkonsulat, or Swiss Consulate, is the host of this art show and our gathering tonight. And I'm emphasizing that because we're in Swiss territory here, and it's in a way a neutral territory, and a territory that enables a conversation about water that maybe wouldn't happen anywhere else. And I wish to thank its representatives, Ambassador Brunswick, Jale Yoldas, and the entire Swiss Consulate team, which is amazing, for welcoming water and its advocates in this generous way. We're surrounded by hidden currencies of water. There's a waterfall of beef production. You don't see it, but we definitely engage in it. There's a lagoon spoiled with mine tailings. We don't see it. Over there's a stream of water to cool the data centers and data warehouses. And all around us are pipes bringing fresh water to us and removing poisoned water away from us, carrying spoiled water out, day in and day out. These hidden currencies are all diverted from their original flow. The water does not go away, of course, but it is no longer where it used to be. The water does not go away, but it gets loaded with waste and disease. And yet, with its infinite grace, water comes back clean and fresh to restore us over and over again, seemingly inexhaustible, until the limit happens. There is a limit to this circulation, this miraculous process that swallows the bad and returns the good. When that circulation breaks down, we arrive at a point that the United Nations recently defined as the water bankruptcy. It's irreversible. We can't solve this problem alone. We can only solve it together. And to help us think through and beyond all of this, the Swiss Consulate has assembled a distinguished group of experts today with deep relationships to Switzerland, to California, and the global future of water. Please join me in welcoming our panelists, which I'm going to introduce in the order of appearance. And to my immediate left sits Dr. Suzanne Pierre. Good evening. Dr. Suzanne Pierre is a global change ecologist, a biogeochemist, and a founder of the Critical Ecology Lab in Oakland. Her work explores how climate change, ecology, and social justice are inseparable, revealing how water systems are shaped by histories of extraction, inequality, and also resilience. Please welcome Dr. Suzanne Pierre. Joining us from Switzerland and currently at Stanford, I'd like to welcome Dr. Sheena Conforti from the Swiss Federal Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology, or also known as EAWAG, which is also hard to say. And she works at the frontier of wastewater epidemiology and public health surveillance. Her research shows how wastewater can become an early warning system for disease, helping societies and communities respond faster and more equitably to impending change and impending trouble. Please welcome Dr. Sheena Conforti. Next to Sheena, we would like to welcome Dr. Tadesse Kebebew of the Geneva Water Hub, also from Switzerland. Tadesse is a lawyer for international water governance and the protection of water systems during armed conflict. His work reminds us that access to water is not only an environmental issue, but also a matter of peace, justice, dignity, and raw survival. Please welcome Tadesse Kebebew. From Stanford, and in that sense representing California and the Bay Area in many really detailed ways that we're going to learn about, is Dr. Meagan Mauter from Stanford University, and she's one of the leading engineers working on the nexus of water and energy systems. And indeed, we talked earlier about how wastewater can generate energy, and we'll learn more about that. It's very exciting. She directs pioneering research on desalination, water reuse, and resilient infrastructures, and serves as research director of the National Alliance for Water Innovation. Please welcome Dr. Meagan Mauter. So let's go to our first presentation by Dr. Suzanne Pierre, and if we have the slides, or you don't have many slides, but you're speaking.
I don't have slides.
All right, so take it away.
I'm not always a slides person, and I spend a lot of time giving talks with slides. So I think today I'll just share a little bit about my perspective and the work that we do at the Critical Ecology Lab that concerns the cycling of all resources, matter, energy, and water obviously falls within that. And what we study at the Critical Ecology Lab is an understanding, building under an understanding of how our actions, our beliefs as a society, and ultimately the systems that we build as a result of those beliefs and those actions control the cycling of matter in ways that didn't occur on this planet prior to human dominance. And we particularly focus on the 15th century onwards as a very important and pivotal time in human history when the earliest forms of globalization were really taking place. With the first corporations formed in that period of time, the Dutch East India Company and so on, the real enterprise of exploration which led to systems of exploitation were beginning to move many different types of biological and inert matter around the world. And I think there are people on this panel who can talk to the way that diseases, pathogens were exchanged across these continents as a result of these exchanges. What we really study is what happens once these companies, the people who worked for them, and ultimately the societies that were built up in these new world locations, how they actually were responsible for transforming landscapes in completely novel ways, novel to the planet and novel to humanity. And so our research is really concerned with understanding how these novel changes brought about by human actions of that time were really pivotal for the ecosystems that we observe throughout the Americas today. And a great example of kind of how that connects to water, and I think this can kind of be a prelude to the modern conversation we'll get into, is thinking about how water is really changed and moved around systems by agriculture. So we all know that agriculture was a really major driver of this kind of early global economy. There were several kind of key cash crops that were essential in building the wealth that we see now in Europe. And sugar, tobacco, indigo, and cotton are just among the major ones. And these are very intensive crops to produce at scale, and they're also plants that were really domesticated to kind of consume a lot of water and kind of be very productive. So I'm not sure how many more minutes I have for my little portion here. Okay, yeah, you give me, that was very generous, thank you. Yeah, I will kind of, to wrap it up, I will say that one dimension of the water cycle that we are studying now in the Critical Ecology Lab is understanding how the demand for water that these crops that were planted by the Danish and other colonial entities really changed ecosystems from the aquifer up. So Evapotranspiration is a big word that really means something that we experience and see all the time, just sort of invisibly. Plants move water out of the ground through their root systems, pulling water, for their life, but they also release water through the pores on their leaves. And that is called evapotranspiration. It's a very major part of ecosystem energy exchange. So ecosystems actually lose water through this process, and the more plants are intensively farmed, the more water is really demanded by this system. Today, St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands has exceptionally depleted aquifers as a result of this system of agriculture. So fundamentally, different plants grow in St. Croix and throughout the Caribbean as a result of the aridification that colonialism brought about. This is a major piece to understand as the backdrop to kind of this modern conversation about corporate entities demanding water for cooling.
Thank you so much. And do you want to say one thing or two about the Critical Ecology Lab and how it operates? Because we're looking at institutions that are generating change and looking for solutions and looking for repair. And so how does the Critical Ecology Lab fit into that scenario?
Thanks for, the prompt is appreciated. I often forget to lead with that. So I'm the founder and executive director of the Critical Ecology Lab. I'm a scientist who saw that academia was not serving our society and still remains, I think, insufficient to solve a lot of the issues because academia and universities really replicate a lot of the harmful economic and social systems that we're really trying to address with climate research and with other kinds of studies of the natural world and how it's being impacted negatively now. So we are a not-for-profit organization. We are very small, based in the Bay Area, and we essentially rely on grants, both private and government grants, to fund our research and our operations and to really model a different way of doing research outside of traditional institutions, ultimately aiming for change throughout institution, right? Modeling reform from without.
Thank you. And I think when we talked earlier, you mentioned one term that I wanted to share with the audience is really compelling to me and that I could take home with me. And your term was about accelerating extraction. And I think you spoke about a lot of institutions and businesses and entities that even while they're appearing to reduce extraction, they're actually accelerating extraction. You want to say something about that? And then,
yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly where I left off.
Brilliant. It was brilliant.
I mean, I think many of us will talk about this, but what we're really getting at when we talk about water and AI is like the water is needed only in the face of accelerating innovation, as I think it's framed here in the Bay Area. And as you mentioned, it's acceleration for who, but as acceleration in technological advances and so forth, and really capital gains take place, there is a sort of tantamount demand for water to serve a purpose. And I think either you or someone else in the introduction used a phrasing that was so beautiful. I think it was kind of water doing a kind of work for us. What work will water do? And so I think that this is maybe a reach, maybe not, but as we accelerate our demand for energy to fund, to support these massive models that are really not related to when my dad queries like what plants are best to grow in our yard in New Jersey. They're really related to these much larger corporate demands for AI models and large language models. So I guess what I'm getting at is when water is doing work, it is in parallel with other exploited human entities, right? In order to enable acceleration, something is going to be exploited. Our question, I think today and forever is how can we minimize that exploitation? How can we make sure that water is doing work that is serving all of us and not harming other living systems?
Thank you so much, Suzanne, Pierre. Let's give her a round of applause. Yeah. Onwards. Now, let's move on along our beautiful seating order and go to Dr. Sheena Conforti and ask you, you see water in a very different way. Do you want to share your perspective on water? You're also looking at water very closely, and what do you see?
Yeah, so I think I do have a slide. I tried to summarize. So first of all, welcome to everyone. It's really nice to see so many people interested into the topic here. And I'm a scientist, and my perspective around the cycle of water was like about health. And so I was like, I'm interested in to see how water affects human health, how we can use water to make inferences about human health, and at the end also how water can affect ecosystem health, if we can say, call it like this, a little bit in line with what Suzanne was saying. And so I decided to bring, from my perspective, but also from the EAVAG Institute perspective, which is one of the public research institute in Switzerland dedicated to water, some real-world AI application to try to address and solve global challenges related to water. And so I would start with the public health perspective and the microbiological perspective, which is the first one. Thank you. I will tell you, which is actually how can we use AI to better interpret the biological signal in water. So we are people, we are happy people because we have access to safe drinking water, right? But of course, we need to monitor this drinking water, and there are a lot of like monitoring plans and so on all over the world. And one thing that AI can do is to improve the identification of some microorganisms in there. So always on this line, always on the public health perspective, we can also use wastewater to actually infer the health of a community. So imagine that everything that we eat, that we drink, that we ingest, that we take in, ends up in the sewage system. And we can actually use this wastewater to infer how many people are infected with a certain virus, how many people use certain drugs, how many people are using antibiotics, and so on. And so here's the value of water also to inform about public health. And I see a very valuable tool as AI in being able to integrate this huge amount of data coming from wastewater all over the world and integrate them with clinical surveillance or with environmental surveillance, with public data sets to really try to forecast and predict potential future risk related to health for people, right? So let's say very negatively, can we avoid the next pandemic? Then this wastewater, because there is a cycle, we drink it and then we shed it, and then this wastewater enter into our wastewater treatment plants. And there are like different steps to treat it and to make it good again. And one of the steps essentially is actually the biological removal of nitrogen. We don't want nitrogen to end up in our water bodies, right? And to do that, we use microorganisms that consequently they produce nitrous oxide. But nitrous oxide is a potent greenhouse gas. And so some researchers at EAVAG, for example, they are using AI to use like hybrid models that couple mechanistic understanding of the process, the treatment of the water itself, together with machine learning to try to predict the amount of this gas emission under different scenarios. So this is one potential tool of how to use AI. So to go on with the flow, water is treated, and once that is treated, it's been like released into the river, into the lake, in our water bodies. And we all know that it's not always completely treated. There are always like some traces of something that remain in there. And so some other people and researchers are trying to use AI to predict what is the effect of chemicals on organisms living in this waste, in these river bodies, for example. So while some scientists focus on using AI to monitor small-scale water bodies, drinking water, or maybe a river, some others instead decided to use AI to integrate satellite data to better monitor large water bodies that might be contaminated. And so here, if you maybe open up, all of you, Google Earth, you can see that there are some rivers in the world that might look a little bit more green than other, right? And that's actually what they are doing, and they are doing that thanks to the help of AI, of course. Now, I'm almost done, but once part of this wastewater that is treated goes and is released into the river, but part of it, we want to treat it this even further because we want to drink it. And I was really like impressed by the fact that nowadays, like always, but to make this water drinkable again, we often use chlorination. I think that Switzerland is only one of the only few exceptions that doesn't chlorinate water. And what does AI do right now, nowadays, is to dose the concentration of chlorination depending on how much microbes there are in real time. And that's very impressive, right? Like, we can just say, okay, there is much less microbe than usual, so I just add less chlorine, so maybe water tastes better. And last but not least, there are also like the use of AI in the urban context. So namely, how can we use AI to better construct cities and landscape that are resilient to flooding? And as we saw, and probably you know it better than me, climate change might increase the risk for flooding. And so how can we use these AI tools? And so now I just told you and provided you some example of how in science we use AI to improve health of ecosystem and of people. But of course, we need to use it in a reliable way, in an equitable way. And I would finish saying that we try to use AI to improve ecosystem health, but we are all aware that AI usage also affects ecosystem health. So we should really find a balance there. Thank you.
Thank you. And earlier we were talking about when is the best time to sample wastewater. So what do you think? What is the best time of the day to sample wastewater?
Morning.
Yeah, it's between 5 and 7, 8, 9 a.m.
We've all made our contributions, and yes. And
the evening is also surprisingly well.
Okay, good. Well, and so the other question that's burning in my mind right now is who pays for all this? You know, you're working on everybody. None of this is for free, right? So sampling water is very expensive, and even with AI, it doesn't get much cheaper. In fact, sometimes we start doing more work that we didn't do before. So who pays for all this?
So this is a great question. I think that the field, like I can speak for Switzerland and for EAVOX. So the field grew a lot after the COVID pandemic in the past 5-6 years, right? And now, for example, EAVOX just became the reference lab for wastewater research in Switzerland, right? And so I think that it has such a potential really to improve the health of human and to preparedness and mitigation risk that the state itself, actually, the country itself. So we, at the end, as taxpayers, pay it.
That's true for California too. And let's move on. Dr. Tadesse, how are you doing? And what is your perspective on water? You see water in a yet again different way, and you're a lawyer for water, really. And how is it working at the Geneva Water Hub?
Yeah, thank you, Greg. On my side, I work with Geneva Water Hub, and we are a center of water for peace. And our guiding principle is sharing water equitably, and sparing water in situation of armed conflict will bring peace, will build trust among communities, and it will create a kind of bridge among communities, and that is what we want to see in the future. Saying this, my focus would be on fresh water, so maybe the first slide. As you can see on this slide, recently the UN Institute of Water, Environment and Health has published this alarming report. This is a trending report, and it says global water bankruptcy. So it's saying we are living in deficiency and we are at the point of no return. What that tells us is the way we are utilizing our water resource is not sustainable. So what we have to do is we have to devise a mechanism to make sure that our use and management and governance of water has to be sustainable. And to do that, we have legal regimes, we have rules, But the problem is usually these rules, there are way out for companies to avoid the applicability of those rules. So in my quick presentation, what you will see is how AI could defeat those purposes or how it could also help them improve. And I didn't finish actually, sorry. Yeah, so the last one here, I said AI is now a user of water, and also it contributes to enhance proper water governance, management and governance both. And what that would lead to the question of who gets what and who decides and at whose cost. This question is a question of justice, and as this forum is also about justice, and what we consider water not only as a resource, we call it, it's also a political tool, it's also a strategic tool, as we have seen in the current conflict in the Middle East. And it's also a human right. So taking into account all these factors, we have to bring this new notion of water justice, which is an evolving concept in itself. There is no a fixed definition of this concept of water justice. It's a kind of framework, but there what you have is a variety of components from water allocation to ensuring inclusivity of every communities, including indigenous communities. So we need to work on water justice, which has to accommodate all those emerging rights. And as I was mentioning, the context is different in some parts. So for instance, in the US, this idea of water as a human right, access to water as a human right is a bit questioned. But in most countries, at some countries, even is a constitutional right. It's a human right and a constitutional right. So why I mentioned this example is to tell you that the context of water justice, the understanding of the water justice is different across scales, across countries, across jurisdictions. Second slide. And so here I would like to talk about the positive aspect of AI in water governance and the management. Management at the practical level, I have listed some of the elements there. It could help us better planning, knowing what freshwater resource we have, and at the management level, whether there is water leaks, whether we have to treat water and how to treat water, everything. So we have seen already one example on treatment of wastewater. That definitely is a contribution, a plus from the side of AI. And there are some ethical and practical concerns because AI, for instance, the use of AI, the water use of AI hasn't been disclosed. That's lack of transparency. We have some issues of maintaining, perpetuating the power asymmetry because we said water is political, so those in power and in control will still decide on who has the priority to use water. That could be also one of the negative side of it. And of course, in areas where we have limited data access, then the impact of AI could also be limited. The next slide. The footprint. Here is a very interesting one. So some people talk always about AI in a negative aspect because of this impact. As you can see, most of the data centers are in the water-stressed region. 40% of all the data centers are in the water-stressed region. And the big data center could use 5 million gallons of water per day. And this is a huge one. And it could feed a small town, for instance, that amount of water. And of all that water, 75 to 90% of it will evaporate. So usually the data center that we have, mostly, they use evaporative cooling system, and that is a waste of water, as you can see there. And the other damning point there is most of these data centers use potable water, drinkable water, which is also a concerning element. And in the US context, I want to show you one data there, which is only 1% of the national water use is used by AI, but then the problem is the impact at the local level is really devastating. I have given you here one example in what happened in Oregon in a small city, Dallas. There was a battle, of course. They took a litigation against the city to disclose the amount of water being used by the AI. First, the government said it's a trade secret, it is confidential, but then later they were forced to reveal, and we have seen that 25% of the water of the city is being used by the data center. So this is a damning issue, and that at some places it has raised protests. There were some pushbacks on creation of new data centers and etc. So this has to also be taken into account when considering water in the AI. The next slide. So what possible mitigating, I would say we have both positive and negative aspect of it, but then how can we deal with the negative aspect of it? So here are some of the research findings of different scholars suggesting there are some way outs. For instance, we can use the closed loop system, where we can avoid evaporation. Some of them were also recommending using recyclable water or treated wastewater for cooling purpose. There are also other options, including geography, locating your stuff where the weather condition is conducive. These are some of and of course the one I put there in green is a very promising one, is to invest in restoration of our water resources. This could be also a positive mitigating thing that the companies could take. And the last slide, by conclusion, I would say, of course, data centers will not go away, obviously, they will live with us, they are here, and they of course offer us opportunities and challenges, and the question will be ultimately how to use them, and they have brought a change in water governance, and how that change has to be made equitable, accountable, and sustainable. So that has to be the concern we have to address now. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this brings us exactly to the intersection of water and energy. And thank you for bringing up these very substantive questions. And of course, I'm already wondering what can we all do to participate in this transformation and make it smoother. But let's hear from Meagan. You're at the intersection of water and energy. And what happens there? Well, how do you see water?
Yes, thank you for having me. As Greg alluded to, I think when we think about water, what we're really thinking about is security, its resiliency, its affordability, and its sustainability all at the same time. As we look to water systems, we also acknowledge the ways in which water systems interact with all of the other infrastructure systems we have, including data infrastructure systems, including power systems. And so what I want to talk about today is a little bit of an extension of what my two previous panelists talked about at a high level, but kind of ground that in some very specific project examples to give you a tangible sense of what this means to try to both design and operate water systems in light of that connectivity. There was a clicker historically, and so there are a lot of animations. I'm going to need you to go quickly, but maybe just do all of them for the slide. So we are kind of aware of the ways in which climate change is being felt through the water cycle. The aridification, the changing precipitation patterns are forcing us to look towards new solutions, often engineering solutions, to address these changes. We need to increase the efficiency of our water use. That includes at data centers and agricultural settings, which is really the vast majority of water use around the world. When we don't have enough water, we need to add storage to often buffer intermittency and seasonal variation. If that doesn't work, you build pipelines, you convey water long distances. And California, and the Bay Area in particular, would not exist without large-scale water conveyance. But when that fails, we tap new supplies. And we're sitting also in a home of real innovation around new supplies. San Francisco is really a very, very leading community in terms of water reuse, on-site water reuse. Any building over 100,000 square feet is required to have on-site water reuse. And so this has really become what we like to call a lighthouse city for innovation in non-traditional water supplies. And to a great extent, AI is supporting innovation in that infrastructure design. I would also say that, in addition to tapping waters like reuse waters. We also tap waters like seawater desalination. We use brackish water as a source. We might use industrial wastewater as a source, or agricultural reuse as a source. So a lot of the work that we do as a center in the National Alliance for Water Innovation is understanding what non-traditional sources are out there, but also what are the treatment innovations necessary to advance use and reuse of those waters. This picture is actually a picture of Santa Barbara's desal plant, which I'll come back to in just a second. But the other thing that we really, if you can go to the next slide, need to acknowledge is that under these changing climates, what we're going to see is not just less water. In fact, we'll get about the same amount of water, but we're going to see a lot more variance in the amount of water that we get interannually. And when you have increased variance, what you also have is a breakdown in the affordability of that infrastructure. You start to have to build more infrastructure and more infrastructure of different types. And ultimately, where you end up is an infrastructure asset in California that might be used 1 out of every 10 years. That's really tough to design around. And so what we're really excited about in the AI space, if you can keep going, is innovation in the ways in which we can use AI to manage volatility. If you could just okay, so when we talk about managing volatility, we're really talking about how we optimize water resources portfolios. When do we integrate those new supplies? How do we integrate them? Where do we put them? How do we adaptively deploy them so that we only build them just in time when we actually need them? And then how do we operate them flexibly so that we can derive value from what would otherwise be an underutilized capital asset? So I would just say water infrastructure has historically really been engineered for a stable climate. Our lab, the Water and Energy Efficiency for the Environment Lab, tries to build tools to help water systems work in the climate that we have today. If you can go to the next slide. So one of those places that we do a lot of our work is in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is a really interesting place hydrologically because it's pretty isolated, but it is connected to the State Water Project, and it is, in addition to being pretty isolated from a water perspective, is also very isolated from a power perspective. In California, water and power are so tightly coupled, and Santa Barbara is a place that is a bit of an island in both of those respects, and so a really nice small-scale study site in which to do a lot of this work. And in Santa Barbara, I showed you that picture of a desal plant early on. They built a desal plant following a drought, a very, very severe drought in the late 80s, and they were really very close to day zero water. They put a lot of money on the table, $75 million back in the late 80s, to build a desal plant. And they commissioned it, they started it in 1992, and then it started to rain. They opened it in May, and they closed it at the end of June. Their water that was in the Kachuma Reservoir was overflowing with fresh water. It was spilling into the ocean, and they said, well, we're gonna have to shut down this plant. So it ran for 3 months at an effective cost of $104 a gallon, okay? And it wasn't that they did a bad job, right? City water resource managers were doing the responsible thing. They were augmenting supply. So people are at the center of this. People aren't making bad decisions intentionally, right? They're making them because they lack the tools to both explore a wide range of possible decision outcomes and adaptively manage their water resources today. We're really excited about the way that AI is helping us to innovate on these traditional static planning tools and instead sense our environment and take in massive quantities of data that give us clues about when and where we're going to need to integrate these non-traditional sources. So we've worked very closely with the city of Santa Barbara to develop dynamic and adaptive planning tools that will help them specify more effectively when to bring on new resources and of what type. If you can go to the next slide. So for instance, where you might explore a wide variety of future drought scenarios, because we don't know exactly what climate change is going to bring. We can simulate tens or hundreds of thousands of kind of 100-year periods that lets us look at what's the likely decision policy that's going to minimize the cost of that portfolio while still ensuring a safe and adequate water supply for the city of Santa Barbara. We can help inform what kind of water resource technologies we need to deploy, whether that's base load, seawater desalination in red, and how much, or whether that's decentralized water reuse in green that you can more rapidly commission and decommission, bringing it online when you need it and shutting it off when you don't. And ultimately, we're doing that with an eye towards storage and managing this as one big regional system. So with AI, portfolio design becomes this dynamic, multi-objective control problem that allows us to adaptively deploy these resources and helps municipalities more cost-effectively and affordably deliver the water that's a human right in the state of California. Okay, next slide, please. I will also say that like AI, non-traditional water sources like seawater desalination plants have big impact on our power grid, right? And I would go so far to say that power, supplying power is really very, very much at the heart of a lot of our water challenges as well. This is a kind of a breakdown of the costs that we see when we're starting to deploy seawater desalination plants. You often have a lot of that debt service that I mentioned before. It's very expensive to build. You've got maintenance and labor costs that are another third. But a third of those costs are really power costs. And so while you have, if you can just go all the way through, thank you. About a third of the costs are power costs, but 40% of that bill is actually charged during only 15% of the month. Those are the peak hours between 4 and 9 p.m. And the reason that it's more expensive is that the energy bill is a function not just of how much power you consume, but it's also a function of the rate at which you consume power and the time at which you consume that power. So this is a plot of the price of the CAISO grid in California. And what you can see is that in certain times of day, it's very cheap. That's when we have ample solar on our grid. And other times of day, in the red, it's actually quite expensive. But what this kind of spread allows us to do is arbitrage energy while also allowing more solar capacity to come onto the grid. So we've done a lot of work using AI to help us control plants in order to move load from high time of use periods to those off-peak periods. And if you can go all the way through the next slide, that would be great. So desalination facilities are actually two back, thank you. Thank you. Sorry, one more back. Thank you. Desalination facilities turn out to be the lowest cost grid scale energy storage solution that's out there. Turning off a desal plant is much cheaper than building a new battery. And so we're doing a lot of work to leverage that flexibility, both designing a desal plant for flexible load operation, but also helping operators anticipate how to do this in a way that is safe for their plant, accommodates labor schedules, ensures high water quality, etc. So essentially what we're doing is we're turning it off during those high, more expensive time periods and then ramping it back up when there's actually a lot of solar on the grid and there's opportunities to upflex demand at these plants. And in doing that, we actually save a lot of money for the plant. We're talking, if you can go to the next one, about 10% on the energy bills of a desal plant, while also providing probably much greater value to the grid itself, allowing new load to come online, a whole range of electrified processes, including heating your house, charging your car, and powering data centers, but also allowing variable power sources like wind and solar to be more effectively integrated into our CAISO grid. So we are really excited about the opportunity for AI-based control of these plants, particularly in response to dynamic grid prices. But if you can go to the next slide, the real question is, how do you do this in practice, right? To what extent, if you can go to the next slide again, our plant operator is going to trust AI recommendations when they're legally responsible for safe operation. And this gets to the human element of AI. I don't think any of us envision a world in which, or desire a world in which AI is autonomously operating everything in our lives, and that includes our water systems, right? We want to make sure that those water systems are operating in ways that serve human needs. But there is, I think, also a really big opportunity. If we're going to use AI effectively, we need to understand how these AI systems can therefore earn trust of humans. And so we're, in our group, do a lot of work on how physics constrained AI, AI that is really bounded by well understood processes within the plant, intuitive to these operators, can help really assist in the interpretability of the recommendations, and therefore the acceptance and adoption of what is effectively a much more complicated and heuristically impossible control platform. So assisting those operators, not just in daily plant operation, but if you can go to my last slide, really being able to span many orders of magnitude of length scale when making design decisions and operational decisions. So I'll just close by coming back to those three words that I said first. When we talk about water systems, we're really looking for security, affordability, and sustainability. I think AI has a really important role to play in delivering that vision for our water future, but I look forward to further dialogue about where there's also tension.
Thank you so much. It's a round of applause. I believe that water is indeed the front line of climate change, and on that account, I just want to acknowledge Ana Teresa Fernandez, who's in the audience and whose work beautifully marks gives us a chance to hug water and to see water as a body that we can relate to, and it relates to the height of your own body and to the amount of climate change and seawater level increase that we might face. So it's a really beautiful sculpture that sort of substantiates a lot of these things. And thinking about that, obviously water is a global problem, and Santa Barbara is an interesting case, and I learned from my doctor, you don't want to be an interesting case. You want to be normal, right? But climate change suggests that there is no normal anymore as we know it, but it's also really widespread. So do you have any thoughts about how we might scale some of these ideas about AI managing systems? Do we trust AI? But most importantly, how can we scale it across the globe? Because California and Switzerland are both extremely affluent in most counties, places, and they can really cope with these kinds of things. But I think many places that we researched in the context of hydrocolonialism, and when it comes to the Geneva type thinking, there's a lot of places in the world that really don't have access to this at all, but they have a lot of people who live there, and they have the same right to water as we do. So how do we, what dynamics might balance that?
I'm happy to start. We have done, actually I will specifically call out EVAG again, because I just had a wonderful visiting researcher from EVAG come, and he's done a lot of work on small-scale distributed systems, looking both at San Francisco as a lighthouse city for small-scale on-site reuse, but also places like Bangalore, where there are really inadequate water supplies, very costly to think about building centralized piped infrastructure, especially in very rapidly growing and peri-urban regions. And so Abhishek's research is really blending both the technical and the social science research to better understand the benefits that distributed infrastructure can deliver to places like Bangalore, and allow the use of control tools, sometimes AI-driven, sometimes very basic, non-AI-based control tools, but still digital control tools, to ensure high water quality in these apartment-scale complex treatment facilities. A second example is actually Barrett with, I just came off another panel down at Stanford today, where Edward Norton, of all people, was talking about his investments across Africa, and really the ways in which solar electrification is also being paired with water treatment solutions in a very equivalent way to the one I just mentioned in Bangalore, where they're using a combination of solar panels, batteries, and desal plants to very cost-effectively deliver water across Kenya. And the solution is quite literally a bunch of RO plants. They're controlled, data is collected, and you can use anticipatory maintenance to really understand when you're going to need to send the equivalent of like the Xerox copy guy to replace components or replace parts, because you can't afford to have an on-site operator all the time in a small-scale system. So it's innovation in technology, it's innovation in business models, it's innovation in kind of anticipatory maintenance and sensing and control that are all working together to help ensure that a lot of the technology that we're developing for large-scale systems in Santa Barbara is also making its way into other settings. In fact, frankly, there's a lot of innovation coming from those other settings that's making its way back here.
So more efficient ways, feedback into the places of origin. Do you think that's going to work?
I'm not an expert in what Dr. Mauter does, but I think it's the last point that you made is really interesting. Like, I would love to hear elaboration even on how innovation from these places that are under-resourced and really facing the front lines of climate change are re-entering your lab or other groups that are thinking about this. My knee-jerk reaction as not an engineer is really about whether we can think about the net good, both like moral good and societal good, as well as like sort of net ecological benefit that emerges from taking a place that's in crisis and fitting it with a technology, like a physical technology, as well as AI that can support management, and whether kind of the net benefit is positive. So, but anyway, I'm basically passing it back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, happy to elaborate a little bit more. I think for a long time in the U.S., we've really built around centralized infrastructure. And that was true both on the power side and on the water side. What we've seen is a wholesale change on the power side in some respects, where people have great comfort in putting up a solar panel, installing a battery in their house, and really integrating distributed infrastructure into a centralized grid. The complexity on the water side is, of course, much greater. You're not just supplying electrons, you are supplying kind of water plus, which is an entity, a thing, but also it has a quality. And I think that's where distributed infrastructure was really, really frowned upon in the US for a long time. I would contrast that with places that have severe water need and no piped infrastructure, right? People will go to great lengths and pay enormous quantities of money relative to their income to procure water, safe water for their households, right? And this is absolutely critical to public health, to disease prevention. Sheena, you can talk about this in greater detail. I know EVAG has done a tremendous amount of work in that space, but the benefits of being able to provide a combination of clean water and sanitation infrastructure, especially in ways that are affordable, really, really do change both health outcomes and economic outcomes, probably more substantially than any other investment. So what we're seeing is that there are, it's not technology alone. Frankly, the technology has been around for a long time. It's often innovative business models and innovative methods of deployment that are seeing or are actually able to realize that transformational change. The technology is simple. Putting an RO unit and hooking it up to a solar panel is not hard. Controlling it isn't even that hard. But I think finding ways to monetize it in a way that allows broad access and keeps that infrastructure, even if it's distributed infrastructure, well maintained, is actually very hard. And there's certainly a role for innovative payment systems, innovative servicing systems, et cetera, that will help keep those going.
The most determining factor of health is water. So if it's safe water. And so we would think that is obviously then a great priority. But health is not a great priority in the same way around the world. And so water is broken in many ways. But my question for you all now, and maybe the last question we go to before we go to your questions, is the following. The previous one. What does repair look like? So very simply, considering all the things we just talked about and heard, Tadesse, what does repair look like for you as you reflect on your role in global water justice?
Yeah, on my side, maybe my topic is a bit distinct from the panel as you have already understood. So the focus is, of course, we know the positives of using AI, and we also know that it's also using water. So the way it has been used has to be transparent to everyone. There should not be any trade secret of the use of water. And then the mitigating factors must come first. And that has to be publicly acknowledged. And the fear that most lawyers have about AI is the way it is crafted, the way it is coded. I'm not an engineer, but the way the codes are, the coding is done by experts and technocrats. And often they miss about what's really happening at the local level and the community level, indigenous knowledge. And I heard that there might be some innovative mechanisms through which you might bring in some local knowledge and to adapt to them. But this fear that we employ the techniques and the skills developed at this level to across the board is a challenge, whether it is a transboundary water, whether it's a shared water among the communities. That has to be addressed. And for me, it has to be acknowledged and it should be addressed. That's how I see it.
I think that's beautiful. I think you're speaking to how nuanced the world really is and how specific solutions need to be for specific locations. Everything's so delicate, and if it falls out of balance, it hurts people. So what about your ideas for repair, Sheena?
So,
what does repair look like on a microbial level?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there is right now a repair, and it's also difficult to define it. Like if we stay in the topic, in the framework of AI and water, I would say that actually we need to make AI really like not biased. And one of the problem of using it is that often these models are trained maybe on a huge amount of data that sorry?
Trained on Santa Barbara, and then
Yeah, for example, right? Like, but that doesn't necessarily reflect what we might see in other area of the world, right? So this wouldn't necessarily bring repair in that sense as well. What I'm hopeful for, if we think about safe water that we were saying before, and really like how we could use AI to improve that, because somebody said before that it might be very expensive, and so how can we deploy these tools also like in lower resource settings? But based on my experience, it's also very, very expensive to monitor the water quality using current methods, right? And it doesn't really bring so much advantage besides saying, no, this water is not safe. So maybe like with new AI tools and technology, we might spend exactly the same and might be costly the same, but with having even a higher benefit. So I hope that I can be hopeful in that sense, and maybe we might find some repair in the future.
thank you. And I remember your notion that you have to adjust chlorine depending on how many pathogens there are, and also maybe there's a way to adjust filtering depending on how polluted water is, and we could be very intelligent about that as well. So how does repair look on your end?
Do we have time?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
I think all of what has been shared is really relevant and important. I think my layer on the cake is that if we're to do repair, we actually have to do it in an informed way. History has shown us so many analogs to what we're talking about now. Just an example, thinking about Sheena's work with wastewater or water treatment and pathogens, I think about how we look at the study of what are described as neglected tropical diseases. For many centuries, there have been diseases that just simply don't get as much research conducted on them until kind of the investment appears to do so, but have been neglected because they're global south specific and therefore not relevant to more wealthy populations. And so, one of the ways that we have to think about bias is like observing past bias, like how have scientific fields continued to maintain kind of hierarchies in what is prioritized and invested in, so that when we're thinking about surveillance of water quality and pathogens, and we think about where we'll actually be training the models to analyze water quality data and pathogenic data, if we're only looking at global north water samples, we simply will not have the data set to understand what microbial communities in water will look like in the global south. And then we'll go, a century from now, oh drat, we have neglected global south water problems, and hopefully we can train AI to fix that. So I think that there's just a lot of hindsight that can be so valuable for every aspect of thinking about the cost-benefit analysis of AI in all of these situations.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Let's thank the panel for this overview. And now comes the hard work of you presenting us with the questions you have, and we'll pass those on to the panel. And if you please raise your hand and use the microphone. I see one hand is up. That's great. And how are you all feeling? Are you feeling thirsty?
Definitely.
There is going to be dessert after this, and the dessert is very special. We'll talk to you about that in just a minute. So onwards. Yeah, questions.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this panel. Just to hone in on the past, while I was visiting Ghana, I saw that the e-waste from the last technical revolution ended up there. And not only are they causing cancer with living on VCRs and large TVs and that, but they also destroyed their water and saw babies sucking out of sachets, which is plastic bags with water. And I think with this next revolution with AI, so for context, I used to run some of the data centers at Facebook, and I'm an engineer, so worked at AMD and stuff like that. So definitely destroyed the planet. Apologize, but it's not something that I was taught or that it was in my OKRs and KPIs. How do we bring this upstream into the governance and the decisioning that we are doing with this next revolution, so that we don't have to take care of it after the fact?
That's a great question. So how do we bring our care upstream?
I'm happy to just chime in a little bit. I engage pretty closely with a lot of the sustainability leads of large corporations that are building data centers. There's a lot of work that is going into how do you site data centers and how do you source water for those data centers in ways that are not detrimental to the local water table, are not detrimental to the local water utilities rates, et cetera. No one's making broad data available on their water center or data center water usage, but there is effort to focus, at least among some developers, to focus on how do you tap water reuse as a source of water? How do you employ offsets within the watershed and do that in a way that is actually accountable? Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Does it start to introduce the concept of a market for water and like an ability to track who's using it and where and for what? Yes. And that's actually a concept that I think we need a heck of a lot more of, right? Because the way in which we allocate water, at least in the Western U.S., makes almost zero sense. It's not to a highest and best use standard. It's not reflective of like societal needs necessarily. It's really like a combination of riparian rights and like kind of very old school water right law. And we're in desperate need of reform. And in some ways, it's like, don't waste a crisis, you know? If the injection of public concern over data center water use, which is a drop in the bucket compared to the other sources of industrial water use, if that's what pushes us over the edge to a more rational way to think about water rights allocation and water use, then like, so be it. You know, I will take it, and I will take some of the thought leadership and industrial leadership that is actually coming from folks, some folks in some of those sustainability offices. It's not perfect, but at least it's a start.
Thank you. Any other takes?
Maybe I can add a bit on what you have asked. Rather than acting after the fact, what is really important is to properly regulate the companies. But the problem is these companies are owned by billionaires and they can buy them out of the regulation. And that's the problem. I was mentioning the example. The city was defending the company using the water. So we have to come to our senses and see that the law should apply to everyone equally. If so, then we will have a proper functioning mechanism to regulate before it happens. And of course, whenever you set a factory or a company, the rule normally, globally, is that you have to do proper environmental impact assessment. But then these companies, when they know that they have this water footprint or environmental footprint, they don't basically do it, but then they bribe officials and etc. I'm being blunt here. Then they proceed with what they do, and then that at the cost of the people living there. Yeah, so it's about proper regulation.
Yes, and use our senses. I appreciate that. Go ahead.
Okay, just to be brief, because I know we have to wrap up. Two things that I think emerge from the question, which is a really good question in the comments so far, is like, number one, we are asking a lot of questions about how do we cite AI or how do we structure AI in order to minimize these damages. But I think that it's a problem of democracy that the question of why do we cite AI has never gotten to really be part of public discussion. That decision was made for us by the companies that we're talking about. So why has been precluded, how, we've moved on to how, and all of us are really reeling in the how. And I think that there's so much important work that's happening there to mitigate damage, but we have to backtrack into the why. And I think that the problem with the why is we're not having this conversation about treating the issue of where to and how to apply AI and its costs. We're treating it like a discussion in a boardroom and not in an operating room or an ER, because we should be triaging the most important problems in the world and using AI really judiciously in those situations. And what we actually see is that market forces are driving where AI is being used, not a triage approach.
Yeah, market forces often scope temporally, very narrowly. They scope quarter to quarter, and it would be great if we scoped decade to decade and thought about what is it going to look like in 10 years. But also, we can call some of these things in and say, I'm not going to waste any food anymore, because the biggest waste of water comes from us wasting food every day. You know, things that don't look fresh anymore, we throw them out. And so I'm sure we could offset some of those costs by calling these things in and say, well, also minus AI. I'm choosing not to use AI to do this thing. I'm choosing not to scroll Instagram for 2 hours because I can do something else. I can get a massage instead. I guarantee you, 2 hours of massage is better than 2 hours of Instagram. Anyways, another question perhaps.
One more question, really.
Go up front there first.
Okay.
Yeah. And then back there, and then we got it.
I had 2 questions. The first one, I remember you mentioned using seawater as an alternative for cooling data centers. And throughout your lines of work with like your coworkers and other researchers, has there ever been a discussion about other forms of cooling outside of water? Or that's ever been a discussion or a thought within your community? The second question is a little left field. It might be a little out there. Since you guys are all like, your professions are towards like good things, like environmental sustainability, humanity, are there like companies, government entities, anything of that sort that would be in opposition of your research and what you're trying to do? Yeah, it's kind of a lot to ask, but
That's a great question. And do you want to answer the first one about alternatives to water cooling?
Sure. So if you don't do water cooling, you can do air cooling or dry cooling. The impact of that is simply to dramatically increase your energy consumption. So there's a trade-off. A lot of people are just doing pure dry cooling now, and they're not connecting these data centers to water use at all. If you have a power grid that can support that, great. But as I've just said, I think actually in some ways, the bigger problem is often how do you support load growth on our grid? So there's trade-offs.
That brings me back to the question of what if we just occasionally couldn't get online? You know, how bad would that be? I mean, 20 years ago there was no online, right? It's like we have now. What if we just had to wait sometimes? What if we just had to be patient? That would be awesome. And your second question, though, is there any sort of bad actors or opponents to this? And that's a really good question. Any thoughts about that? Who is resisting your work? Who do you wish was getting out of your way? Where are the obstacles in this path? Is that it, right? Yeah. What are the biggest obstacles, Sheena?
You asked I'm the youngest here. Okay, you're asking the wrong person. No, I think that it's a very interesting question, and it might really depends also from the field. I personally never found so serious obstacles, but also because I believe what I've been doing is pretty applicable from now. Like everything emerged from like the COVID pandemic. I wonder how supportive would that be in 10 years if we don't have another pandemic anymore, right? So things change pretty fast. But I cannot answer you if for a specific opponent or not.
Did you have any thoughts?
I work with questions and topics that are extremely contested and being actively defunded by, it's fortunate that we're in Switzerland right now because, stepping outside of here, I certainly feel that my work is under threat. I think that all of our work is sort of on a spectrum of threat because it doesn't always, in all of its formats, have a capital benefit. And mine maybe sits on the far end of that, where we're explicitly making critiques of systems of power that are very lucrative, but are also extremely damaging to environment.
I would add to that if we don't have the data, we can't make the change. And so when people start suppressing data and erasing data and manipulating data, then we really are at a loss for taking action. And so those forces that oppose the collection of data and the curating of data really hamper us in many ways. And so it's really a foundation of all this.
So one more time, thank you so much for coming. Thanks for all this information. It was amazing. Thank you.